The views and opinions on Where Did the Road Go belong to those making them. Do not mistake allowing freedom of speech for agreement. This month's Where Did the Road Go is sponsored by the following amazing individuals: Greg Ross, Bill Illuminati, Allison Cook, No One, Yvonne Williams, Super Inframan, 36 Dingo, and Michael Frisky. Thank you all for helping to make this show possible. And if you'd like to help out, become a patron at wheredidtheroadgo.com. It's only $3 a month for lots of extra content.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? I have with me back tonight Suzanne Chancelor. Hello.
Hello, hello.
And joined also by Mike Clelland.
Hello.
And it's only been a few weeks since you've been on. I'm really happy to have you on frequently.
Right on, yeah.
But I talked to Suzanne about coming on, and since you two knew each other, I figured, it's a good excuse to get Mike back on the show.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. We don't really, it seems like lately we haven't really been chatting as much, so this is a great connection. Thank you, Seriah.
Suzanne, you had written me, and do you want to explain what you were talking about when you wrote me?
Yeah, what were you talking about?
Sure. Well, I'm obviously a very avid listener of your podcast. I think it's fantastic. One of my top 3, I would say, podcasts that I listen to.
Oh, thank you.
Sure. And a couple of episodes ago, you had mentioned that not as many people were writing in about, or sending in their listener stories.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, I have a lot of really great stories. And although we'd had a couple of interviews about my experiences with, otherworldly beings and what have you, I have a lot of other experiences that I don't really know if they're actually tied into that, but I think they're really fascinating. And I've been keeping a journal since I was a kid, and I'm really glad that I did because I remember every detail.
Yeah.
And as I started realizing that I was an experiencer of the, it's hard to call, know what to call it. Is it that I'm a UFO experiencer? Am I visited by, otherworldly beings? Are they energy beings? Who knows what they are?
Yeah.
But I, as I got older, started thinking, are those experiences that I had as a child connected to the ones that I was experiencing in my mid-20s? And then I started having those other experiences again. So I'm thinking, are these connected? And so I wanted your opinion, and maybe if I would share some of these, maybe people could give their opinion as well. And now that Mike's here, then we can have his opinion.
and we were talking about, what comes first, the experiences?
Yes.
Or does the experience open up to other things? And I was, this is a question I've asked a lot. I don't think we've ever really thoroughly addressed it on a show, though. It's a very good question. Because you see people have like a big experience and then they start having other experiences, but it doesn't mean those experiences weren't occurring prior.
Yes.
And their brain may have been filtering it out as that's not real or whatever until they have that big experience. And then they start remembering, oh yeah, remember when I filtered this? Your brain's like, remember when I filtered this thing out? This might actually have been important.
Right. Yeah. And funny you should say that, because I remember when I was a kid that I would have these weird things happen, but nobody else, none of my friends ever said, oh my gosh, I had this weird thing happen to me. Yeah. So I thought there was something wrong with me. And so I thought, I better not talk about this, but I'm not going to forget it.
Good.
And so I had a strange file in my brain that I would just put it in and shut the drawer and just leave it there for a rainy day. And so I was a strange kid because of it. But I always thought, because I had that one experience that was weird, then I started recognizing all the other ones as well. So is it just because I recognize them that they are there? Do other people have these experiences, but because they don't pay attention, then they don't happen.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yep. Well, I mean, our brain filters out 99% of what's going on around us.
True. So we choose what we want to remember.
Well, we don't even choose it. Our brain chooses it. We're just the recipients.
Okay. Right. That is correct.
It makes the opinion of what's important to us. And then,
right.
Like, oh, there's a shadow person standing in the corner. That's not important. It's also scary. Just go to the other room.
Yeah. Or like when an experiencer is laying in bed, and I know Mike's had this experience where, he looks out a window and he sees these beings standing outside in the snow. And the next thing he hears is what, Mike?
Now is the time. Oh, yes, they're here. Now is the time to put your head on the pillow and shut down.
Right.
I've told the story 10,000 times, so I kind of go on autopilot. And it's actually interesting because I actually went back to my original notes a while ago, and I said it's so close, but now I can't remember what the actual thing is. Like, I'm not telling it wrong in essence, but
yeah,
like my original diary entry is like one word off, and I can't remember what it is.
So on last week's show, I had Marty Garza on, and he was referencing, I don't remember if it was in the main show or the Patreon. He's talking about an experience he had very much like that when he was a kid, where he looked out the window and saw a UFO with these beings, and then he went back to sleep. And,
that's very normal. That's totally normal.
Well,
I went right back to sleep too, yeah.
And we were talking about that, and he said, the only thing that bugged me is, like, there were trees there. There's no reason I should have been able to see it. On the hill where it was. And so he said he just happened to go, maybe didn't even talk about it on the show, but he said he happened to go back there and to where that he used to live, and realized he went up to that hill and went, oh, I could see right in where my old bedroom window was. I definitely could have seen it. Okay. So he said all this time he's been saying, oh, I couldn't have seen that. And now he realizes he definitely could have seen that.
Right. So is that like an interdimensional experience where we're not seeing reality?
He just thought that he was looking, like the direction he was looking, his memory of how the terrain and everything was, he's thinking, no, there would have been trees in the way, but there wouldn't have been. That's what he was saying. Like, he definitely could have seen that hill from his bedroom window. But all these years he's been thinking, I got to be remembering it wrong, because there's no way I could have seen that hill from my bedroom window.
Well, that's weird, because when I was 4 years old, my very first experience that I recalled was being tucked into my bed by these beings and then going back to sleep. Who would do that? Oh, this is normal. Let's just go to sleep now. But maybe it was normal to me at that point in my life, and I didn't think that it was odd, and so it didn't alarm me. And so it was maybe comforting in a way. I almost feel like it was a comforting feeling, like I was being tucked in, like what your parents would do when you're a small child. And I've had that experience throughout my childhood and my early teens repeatedly, where I've been tucked in. And
I don't think I've ever heard that one before.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, what happened was, when I read Communion is when I remembered that these, what I thought were dreams, were actually not dreams at all. And I remembered my first recollection was when I was 4 and I was living in Pasadena. And one morning I woke up after being, let me backtrack. I remember in the middle of the night, I was being carried back to my bed down the hallway of my house in Pasadena, and I could see the ceiling, and then I saw the door jamb of my bedroom. And then I realized it was like these 4 little kids, it seemed, were carrying me, and this is kind of weird, like pallbearers would carry a coffin, and they were carrying me above their heads, and then they put me back in the bed, and then they laid me down and pulled the covers up to my neck, and I went to sleep. And when I woke up in the morning, I went up to my mom, and I said, Mommy, I need a Band-Aid for my belly button. And she said, what do you need a Band-Aid for? And I said, I just need a Band-Aid for my belly button. And she says, honey, you must have had a dream about something, because there's nothing wrong with your belly button. And I started screaming at her. And she says, well, what do you need it for? And I said, they told me that if I didn't put a Band-Aid on my belly button, that it would get infected. And so she went to the bathroom, got a Band-Aid, gave it to me, and I put it on my belly button, and I just walked away. And that was the end of that.
I seem to remember you telling me about the belly button thing.
Yeah, that was the same experience.
I don't remember the tucked in part, and I don't think I've heard anyone else talk about that. Mike?
Really?
I have certainly heard plenty of odd things about going to bed and voices and presences in the room and such like that, and certainly people waking up being tucked in. What's often very common to hear, not very common, but I've heard it many times, like people waking up where the entire bed is tucked in, like like it was made at like that's like blankets are all tucked in around the entire bed, so it's so really, really tight on them.
Oh,
that's not how they went to bed.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah, that's really common. And then waking up on the opposite side, or waking up with your pajamas on backwards, or waking up with someone else's pajamas. There's a great story of someone who this woman, Michelle LaVigne, she's from Massachusetts. I've tried to get a hold of her. We exchanged emails once, probably 15 years ago. She wrote in a great book, a couple of books. One of them is called the Abductee Answers book. I can't remember it now, but there's a couple of books. They're really simple and they're really plain, and they just story after story. Some of them are so funny. But she had her favorite. She had I hope I get this right. She had an AC/DC t-shirt. It was her favorite t-shirt. And she was sleeping in the AC/DC t-shirt. She woke up and she had a Tweety Bird t-shirt on. And she was so mad that she, like, somebody out there has my AC/DC shirt, and now I've got their stupid Tweety Bird shirt. So.
That is the funniest thing I think I've ever heard.
That was a good one, yeah. So.
Oh, wow. Well, I remember waking up once after so I woke up. I was living in Newbury Park, California. I think it was probably 9 or 10 years old. And I lived in a cul-de-sac. And one night, I have wooden blinds in my bedroom, and all of a sudden this light came flooding in. And I went to peek out of the blinds, and I ran into the bathroom and hid in the bathtub. And I have no idea why I did that. But the next thing I know, I woke up standing up behind my bedroom door, which was totally ajar.
Huh.
So I knew that I was hiding from something or someone, but I have no recollection of what happened in between the bathtub and the door. So that was an odd one.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely weird.
Yep. So I just don't know when you say that, Seriah, about like which came first. I almost want to know like your opinion about. So if we are having these experiences, our psychic awareness and all of that heightened because we've had visitations and we've been enlightened by seeing them, or are we, or is it the other way around? You know what I mean? So. Go ahead.
I think it can be both. I think these experiences just happen in general. I think that our brain does filter them out in most cases, unless they're profound. But also, when you've had that profound experience, it changes you. And it because I mean, like when Kenneth Ring did his Omega Project stuff, he found that most people who had near-death experiences and abduction experiences would have things like awakened kundalini. And that draws in this stuff. I mean, I know from experience, because when mine woke up is when all my weird experiences started. I have a couple that were prior to that, but nothing major. It all started with the kundalini.
Wow. So what was your first experience after that awakening?
The first experience were kundalini hallucinations. Oh. So I'd hear things rattling when there was nothing rattling. I would be playing trombone. I'd see smoke coming out of the end of the trombone.
What?
And I knew it wasn't there. Like, I thought I was losing my mind, honestly, because I'm looking at it directly at it and going, there's smoke coming or steam coming out of the end of the trombone bell while I'm playing it. But there's no way that can happen. And then I'd have my mom come in. She'd sit down, I'd play, it wouldn't do it. She'd leave, it would start doing it again. I'm like, I'm clearly losing my mind, you know? And I did end up going to a couple of psychiatrists who were like, no, you're completely sane. I'm like, then what the hell am I seeing?
So what do you think it was that you were seeing?
Well, those are common kundalini hallucinations.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. Any kind of buzzing, ringing of bells. And of course, buzzing is very common in UFO experiences as well. The visual hallucinations of smoke and stuff are very common. I don't remember all of them off the top of my head right now, but all the ones I had were common kundalini awakening visualizations.
Interesting.
It's generally the opening bits of that stuff happening.
Right. I see. Well, I've never personally had that experience, but I've read about it. But what about you, Mike? Have you ever had an experience like that?
I've never had a kundalini awakening that I know of. I did go to my very first Reiki session. There was a woman in the town where I was living in Idaho, the small town, who was doing Reiki sessions, and I did a formal session with her. You know, picked a time, paid her, did the whole thing. went to her little office. And it's interesting because I've talked to other Reiki therapists and they're like, I don't know who this person is. And kind of like, So I sat in a chair and she sat behind me or stood behind me and just basically put her hands above me for maybe 3 minutes. And then she came to the front and said, like, because I was in a real turmoil at that point. That was like the chapter of my life when I was having so many synchronicities. And that's when, Suzanne, when you and I met, I was like in the throes of like, oh, what's going on in my life? And I was really, really I was denying it at the same time I knew it was happening. So it was kind of a mess. But so she put her hands hovered above my shoulders, standing behind me for a few minutes, and then sat in front of me and said, "You're having a kundalini awakening."
Oh.
And I was like, well, okay, I don't feel like, I kind of knew what a kundalini awakening was, but I didn't feel like that. It felt like my life was just like, crumbling apart all around me. And then we talked for a little while and she said, can I tell you what's going on in my life? And then she said, sure. Like, okay, it's pretty weird. And it was like, basically I was like, I feel like I've had UFO contact of some sort, or like what we would call UFO contact. And I'm trying to make sense of it. And I got all these experiences and I'm being flooded with synchronicities. And so much of it has to do with this owl stuff. So I'm collecting these owl stories. And I was kind of when that stuff starts gushing out of me, it's kind of a mess. And then she said, "Oh, I saw an owl last night."
Oh.
And then she tells a story about seeing an owl on, they were doing a walk. Her and her boyfriend would do a walk. They would walk their cat actually at night. And they were walking their cat and they, there was this, I know right where the little road is. There's this little dirt road in the town there. And so she was walking along the road and then there was an owl on a tree branch and they walked past it. And I said, "Oh, what kind of," and then I think it was a great horned owl. And then later that night, she called me and she said, "Oh, it happened again tonight." And it was a different owl. It was a different kind of owl. It was a great gray owl in the same branch. I think it was the same branch, essentially in the same part of the trail. And so she was walking the same road. They walked the cat with her boyfriend every night. And then so they saw a different owl on the same branch. Like after talking, and it was for me, it was like, oh God, like she's like, "Well, how many owls have you seen really?" And she said, "Oh, I mean, I guess I probably have seen a few, but this is the closest, these stand out because they were the closest I've ever been." And so one was the night before talking to me, and one was the night of talking with me doing a Reiki session. And I was just like, this is tied to me. Like this is somehow tied to me.
Do you know who I am? I'm kidding. That's interesting. I mean, well, obviously it's not so strange for you anymore because
it's not strange for me, but it threw me. I mean, I was like, that kind of information was really unsettling, and it was hard for me to, like, it was so heavy-handed. It was just like I was off balance for 6 years of my life because that stuff was constantly happening. It still happens now, but I just let it flow a little more now. So I'm still in awe of it. I've said this many times now, but this is my new kind of way to keep my sanity. I'm still in awe of the magic of it, but I don't let it frazzle me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's a matter of just observing and then trying to see if there was something I should learn from it.
All right, exactly. So all these little milestones, or are they these all like little breadcrumbs leading to the next situation that we need to pay attention to? I had a meditation once where I felt like I had a download from something. Maybe it was my higher self or something. But one of the most important things that I learned from that experience was that all the synchronicities and the people that we have the most synchronicities with are in our lives for a reason, and to pay very, very good attention to all those synchronicities and the people that are involved with them. And it really has changed my life doing that. I mean, I wouldn't be where I am today if I hadn't.
Yeah. And Mike, you mentioned the whole Reiki thing. So when I help other people who have awakened Kundalini experiences, they're usually and I forget who used the term, a morbid Kundalini awakening, which is something that happens when it wakes itself up and it just kind of messes you up like it did me. And first of all these, it's always girls. And I think there's a binary nature to the energy, and that's why. All of them had severe trauma. And I just knew how to do this thing where I move the energy along their spine. And it wasn't until earlier this year when we visited the Seth house, one of the girls that was there, Amy, because she also had Kundalini. And I realized it just being around her because it was setting mine off. And that apparently, just knowing what it was helped her a lot, because then she did research and found out practices on how to, and I didn't have to do anything to help her with it because she did it all on her own. But she was like, "So what do you do when you help someone?" And I'm describing it, and she's like, "That's basically Reiki."
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, oh, so I guess I'm using supercharged Reiki then?
Wow.
Well, I think people are predisposed. Some people are predisposed to have higher Reiki skills, let's say, because of whether it's psychic energy or some sort of inherent energetic properties of their physiology or their spiritual essence. I'm using kind of fluffy words, but I'm not really sure how to say it, but I think you get what I'm trying to get.
I think with me, it's people who I resonate with. And there was at least one person early on that when I did this, I completely overwhelmed her. And it freaked me the hell out because I went a little stronger with it, and it's when my energy was kicking up higher, and she went ice cold and started shaking, and I was like, okay, what's this?
Wow.
And I wouldn't do anything else because I'm like, nope, I don't know what that was. Not playing around with that.
Wow. Well, I think it's very powerful, and I'm really glad you're doing that. I know that you recently had some health issues, and I'm glad that you're feeling better with that. But have you ever given yourself Reiki?
I don't even know how.
Oh, well, you do.
Okay, so when I'm not feeling good, the first thing I do is breathing exercises to raise kundalini energy. But my health issues were entirely because my doctor decided I should try Ozempic to control my blood sugar better so I could use less insulin. And it stopped my digestion.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. That's
unfortunate.
Yeah, so for about 5 days, I couldn't eat or sleep for more than like an hour.
Oh, my God.
And I have no idea how I kept functioning, but I did. And then they gave me an antibiotic that was supposed to speed your digestion. And both the doctor and the pharmacist were like, oh, you're going to take this. You're going to know. It's going to feel like your stomach's draining. And I'm like, okay. Except that's not what happened. It took me 4.5 hours to eat a single power bar.
Oh, my God.
And I'm like, this is not working. So I took a second one, and then I could eat a little bit. But I never got that stomach draining thing. And I'm still, my body's like off kilter from it still. Like it's not affecting me, and like it took a good 3 or 4 weeks to get out of my system.
Wow.
But everything's like it's almost like completely reset everything in my body where I'm going, okay, I don't want you doing this. We have to work on this, and it's blood sugar's doing weird things, and it's just a matter of getting it back onto some kind of balance.
All right. Well, I mean, you might want to consider having Reiki yourself, like going like once every couple of weeks.
Do you know a good Reiki therapist?
Yeah, I
Suzanne?
do.
I am worried about anybody interacting with my energy.
Really?
I had one girl who I was helping, and she knew Reiki, and she wanted to try Reiki on me. And after a minute or so, she just kind of froze with her hands on my back. And I got the sense something was wrong. And so I finally pulled away from her, and she goes, oh my God. She goes, I couldn't move. It was like I was getting electrocuted.
What?
And I'm like, okay, we're not doing that again.
That's just energy. I mean, obviously you must have some pretty strong energy.
Yeah.
What's happening to her. So, well, she needs to, I don't know.
She had strong energy herself, which is why I let her do it, because I figured, well, she of all people should be able to handle it. And she could not.
Well, maybe our energies just didn't, I don't know, get along with each other.
No, they did. I think it just overwhelmed her.
Oh, really? Okay.
I mean, because it's very electrical energy. So saying she felt like she was getting getting electrocuted is
for sure
is par for the course. I mean, I used to blow out all kinds of stuff.
That's right. I remember you saying that.
I don't do it as much now. I still do it on occasion, which is very frustrating.
Well, that's really interesting. Talking about electrical energy. So we are currently under construction in our house. And so Mike, the upstairs bedroom.
I saw the video, yeah.
What? No, I know. But the one that you're in, that one room, we've had about maybe 4 or 5 people stay here who have said that there's something in that room. But we already knew it. But
I never had any sense of anything in that room. So I was there for 9 months.
I know. But
wait, Mike, are you in that room?
I know.
No, I'm not in that room now. I'm in the other side of the country. I'm on the Pacific coast now.
Are you sure?
Suzanne's on the Atlantic coast.
Are you sure part of you is not still in that room?
No part of me is there. I'm pretty sure. So I saw the video. She had video. They were doing construction, so she sent me some video clips of just like the walls being torn out and stuff like that. So and it was there, but I recognize the floorboards.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
So when I first moved here in 2012, I was living here with Jack. We were in a brand new relationship. I moved from California. He came to Maine when I spoke for the first time at the Experiencers Speak conference. And so he drove up from Rhode Island to meet me. And then we drove back down together to Rhode Island. And I stayed here for a couple of weeks. And then the day that I was supposed to leave here to go back to California, Hurricane Sandy hit. So I wasn't able to fly out, obviously, because all the airports were shut down. So I stayed for another 6 weeks. And during that time, he worked nights. He worked until 3:30 in the morning. He worked for UPS. And so I was home alone a lot. And I think it was the first week that he went back to work and I was here by myself. I was sitting in the den and all of a sudden I heard this, "Hey," coming from the living room. And I said, "Hello?" I thought somebody was in there, but there was nobody there. And, after all the things that have happened to me in my life, it just didn't really bother me very much. I didn't feel like it was threatening at all. So I said, "Hey, who are you?" and whatever. And so when Jack came home, I told him, and he says, well, his nephew, I think it was one of his nephews, had been here. And he says, well, I will tell you that upstairs, somebody saw a hat man in the hallway. And I went, "Really? Okay, well, that's interesting." But they didn't feel like it was a threatening energy. It was just more like maybe a residual energy, maybe somebody who lived in the house or whatever. And I was fine with that. And then one day I was taking a shower and I heard a man's voice in the bathroom say, "Good girl."
I remember you telling me that one. Yeah.
So
that's creepy.
It was kind of creepy. But again, I didn't feel like it was threatening. It was almost endearing, like, say, like a grandfather, kind of a voice, So when people started saying that they were seeing or feeling something upstairs, I was like, well, maybe that's part of this. So recently I had a friend stay here, a girl named Robin Lassiter, whom I edited her book.
And who I did the layout for the interior matter of her book.
Yes, you did. And it's a great book called Earth, A Love Story.
Do you know a podcast host who should have her on as a guest?
Yeah, I do. She's amazing. She is amazing. Seriously.
Okay.
No, honestly.
Honestly, I'm serious. I'm serious and honest too.
Anyway, so she came down the stairs the next morning and she said, "I just wanted to let you know that I think you have somebody living or some energy being in your upstairs bedroom." I'm like, if of all the people, I was so glad it came from her because she's pretty connected to energy. So I felt like, okay, this is legit. So what has happened now is since we've had construction upstairs, I was really worried about if it was going to ramp up. But I didn't really give it a lot of thought. I didn't want to give it any negative energy. I didn't want to have any fear connected with it.
Good.
And so I just said what will be. And what has been happening is this. Very strange. So we'll be in the bedroom sleeping, and all of a sudden, I usually sleep with an eye mask on, and my husband doesn't. And all of a sudden, all the lights in the bedroom will come on, and then they'll turn off. And then we have an Alexa in our room, and when you hit the volume to go up, it goes boop, boop. So all of a sudden, I'm laying there, and it goes boop, and then my headphones on the charger go cling. So I think whatever was up there has come downstairs.
It moved out while you were doing the construction.
Yes, I do. But like I said, I'm kind of like, all right. I don't feel any negative energy at all. I don't think that it's threatening. I don't even think that it's like poltergeist or anything. Nothing's flying around. I think it's just like, hey, I'm here type of stuff.
It is electrical in nature, though.
It all seems electrical.
Yeah.
You're right. So when you said electrical, that made me think of that.
I mean, I've had so many electrical things. And I'm sure most of it comes from me because it seems to, be me affecting things. I can, there are days I have, what size TV do I have? Like a 65 inch or something?
Good grief.
When I walk past it, I got a really good deal on it. When I walk past it, some days it feels normal. Other days I can feel that TV from almost a foot away.
Wow.
Like pushing into a magnetic field.
Oh, yeah, I can feel that. I know what you're saying.
And other days, it's not there at all. And I'm like, the hell? And when I feel it, I've had other people, if someone stops over, I'm like, where do you feel the TV? And they'll put their hand almost on it before they're like, well, I can feel it about here. I'm like, okay, all right, interesting. So I don't, because I'm trying to determine if the TV is giving off a stronger and weaker field or if it's interacting with mine, and it seems to be interacting with mine.
Oh, interesting.
I've had numerous times where I've sat down at my computer and all my monitors will turn off and then turn back on.
Wow.
Without me touching anything. There's no direct contact. I just sit down in the chair, which is not connected to anything electrical. And it's like they'll like blink out and blink back on. It's like, yeah, okay, great.
Wow. That's interesting. So this has been going on since your kundalini?
Yeah.
Wow.
It affected blood test machines when I first got diabetes, which was around the same time the kundalini woke up.
Really?
And I didn't know it was affecting them because I had no idea about this stuff.
Right.
I mean, I didn't even believe in energy stuff or any of that. I thought that was all new age crap and just ignored all of it.
Nope.
Until, a decade later where I came across a book talking about kundalini and was like, wait a minute. This is all the stuff that's happening to me.
Like communion.
Kind of, yeah. With me, it was more, there was stuff in transformation that was very similar to the stuff I was getting via doing magic, except it wasn't alien. It was, shadow beings and things like, but a lot of the archetype was there. And I started going, wait a minute, is this the same stuff in a different face?
Yeah, that makes sense. Funny. So my watch battery has been dead when I wake up in the morning and I charge it before I go to bed. And so Jack's like, oh, well, guess who must have come last night? And I'm like,
yeah, maybe it's you.
Maybe it's me.
Yeah.
I don't know. I have no idea.
I used to make digital watches go crazy. Like they would just start showing random times and blinking random data, but they would work for a time and then they'd do that and I'd reset them. Then they'd work for a bit and then they'd stop. Being diabetic, my doctor had suggested I get one of those things that you put on your arm and it monitors your blood sugar. So we could see what my blood sugar was actually doing. Because it doesn't do things that it should be doing. And like it goes up when it shouldn't and it goes down when it shouldn't. And so she's like, well, why don't we try this? I'm like, you want to hook a piece of electronics up to me? I'm like, I give it 3 days. And she's like, well, it'll probably last longer than, and I'm like, 3 days at most. It lasted 24 hours before it just stopped working.
What did she have to say about that?
She went, well, we got a day's worth.
Wow, that's so weird. So I don't know about you, but I think we talked about this the last time. Like I've had so much experience with the UFO phenomenon or with, quote unquote aliens or whatever they are in my life. But it seems like a lot of those experiences have kind of tapered off to almost nothing, but it's been replaced by other experiences.
Yeah.
It seems like all those other experiences are all one-offs. Like I'll have this one experience like this, and then I'll have another one like that. And And so I'm like a little perplexed by that. And I'm thinking, is that normal, like for everyone, or
I think so.
Is it just me, or
I think as you evolve, it evolves.
Right. I thought the same thing. So
I've had mostly one-off experiences aside from like lights and shadow people type of stuff. But even that, like I used to drive along and especially in the spring, I would see little shadow like animals dart across the road. And they were not animals. They were blobs of darkness. And I never took it as a negative thing. It just seemed to be like, I would take it like, okay, this is nature waking up. Because it would usually be in the spring, but it actually stopped an argument between a friend of mine and I. We were arguing in her front yard and we never really argued. This was the thing. This was like a pretty heated argument between us. And all of a sudden, all these shadow things dart between us. They'd like darted from the road, down her driveway, around us, and then disappeared around her garage.
Like, how big were they?
I didn't catch either question.
How big were they?
They were about the size of a rabbit or a cat.
Okay.
What'd you say,
What
Mike?
was the argument about?
I don't remember exactly.
Okay. I'm just curious if it was about some spiritual thing or
no. It was about something she was doing that I didn't agree with. But I don't remember the details.
Okay.
And she just got upset with me, and then we were arguing, and then that happened, and we both stopped talking for a moment. And I'm thinking to myself, well, that was interesting. I've never had that happen, when I'm just like standing there. It's usually when I'm driving. And then she goes, you saw that, right? And I'm like, what did you see? And she's like, little shadow balls that just flew past us around the ground. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I saw that. Like, I'm kind of surprised you did. So it's not just me. All right. And it completely killed the argument. Like, it took everything out of the argument. We just stopped then and talked everything over.
Oh, right on. And they were doing a good deed, I guess.
Right, exactly.
I was living in upstate New York with my partner Andrea at the time, and it was a bright sunny day. It was the middle of the day, and we were in the bedroom for some reason, and we were just both standing upright and talking, and there was some little thing where we were it wasn't quite an argument, but it was like kind of we were kind of hashing something over, and then there was all of a sudden it was like ring, it just appeared, disappeared. It was like a sparkle person, like someone made out of sparkles, was standing like at the edge of the room, just came into formation for like 2 seconds and then left. But it was just like honestly, it looked like a cheap special effect from like Doctor Who, where it was just like sparkles that were like in the shape of a sort of a shortish person who would have been about 5 foot tall, and it kind of had a head. It was no real arms but it was like a head and a shoulders and a torso. And from where I was standing, like I couldn't really see the feet because it was just on the other side of the bed. And it just lasted for like, it just came into being and boom, went out of being. And I was just like, did you see that? She said, yes, the sparkles. And we just kept going into the art, then with a sort of argument in a way. And the argument just continued. And it was like 4 years later, I was like, what the hell? Like, what was that? Like, we just both just like, yeah, the sparkle thing. Yeah, the sparkle man was like standing in the corner of the room for 2 seconds. And I kind of got back to her and said, like, hey, like, do you remember this? What did you see? And she described exactly the same thing I saw. And yeah, so.
Well, maybe it used the emotional energy of the argument to appear.
Well, it wasn't that. It wasn't that exciting of an argument, so it didn't need that much energy, So.
Well, that's why it only appeared for a second.
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
That's weird because a year ago on 4th of July, I was standing in the kitchen making a cup of coffee, and I was looking out the kitchen window, and our next door neighbor, I'm kind of not going to talk very loud when my window's open, but she is kind of like a really negative energy. I'll just put it that way.
Okay.
And always yelling at everything, and yelling at her children, yelling at the pets, yelling. Right. Customer service on the phone.
I remember this lady.
You do remember this lady?
I do remember her. Walking. She was not into when I walked the dog and the dog walked on her grass. She didn't like that.
I know. We have to whisper now.
Okay.
One of my best friends growing up, that describes his mom to a T. She just yelled about everything. She was just always yelling, and it was like, oh my God, this is stressful.
It is so stressful for the whole neighborhood to hear.
Yeah.
And I felt bad for her because obviously she's got some stuff going on, so, but one day I did walk my dog past her house, and the dog did her duty on the lawn, and I picked it up, and she yelled at me, and all the veins were popping out of her neck.
Jeez.
And I said, I just picked it up. I'm sorry, and I just kept walking. But this particular day, on that 4th of July, I'm standing in my kitchen, and I look out the window, and I see this big black mass, and I've never in my life seen anything like this. And what it looked like to me was a ball of energy that was hunched over, and it was about the size of a small bear cub. But the edges of it were like static. Kind of like, do you remember Etch-a-Sketch, how the metallic fibers?
Yeah,
of. Okay, so it was like that, and they were all moving. But I could tell it was hunched over, and I thought at first it was a shadow. Now, there were clouds in the sky, so I thought maybe it was a shadow of a cloud, and it went over her car. But the thing is, there was a white picket fence in front of, and actually it was between the white picket fence and the car. And this mass went in between the two of them, and I watched it as it disappeared into her garage. And I felt
I
I
remember
energy.
You telling me that too, yeah.
But what I'm saying is that was a one-off as well. But you guys had these situations with these shadow beings or other things popping up, and it wasn't really a negative thing. This, to me, I felt it was very connected to her.
Yeah, no, it's entirely possible. I mean, she's probably projecting a lot of bad energy around her, a lot of stress and whatever she's not dealing with that's making her that angry.
Right. But I'd never seen anything in my life manifest like that. And for the size of it, and it felt like so menacing. And so when I went into the living room to tell Jack, I just stood there with my mouth just like hanging open. And he's like, "What's wrong with you?" And when I told him, he says, "Are you sure it didn't come into our house?"
Yeah,
Like,
fair enough.
should we start staging the house, or But yeah, so that was really something. I mean, I hope I never see anything like that again.
Yeah, understandable.
Yes.
Although I just want to reference Static Man on Archive 81, but I doubt either of you have listened to Archive 81.
No.
There's a great character in season 3 called Static Man who you can summon, and he'll help you with things. And his requirement is generally you have to get him, Popeye's pizza or something like that. But he appears as a staticky man.
Wow, that's amazing. Wow.
So why don't we get to some of those stories that you sent me from your childhood?
Yeah. So, there's just so many things, and I'm trying to keep it like on the same track of what we're talking about. But I wanted to share that I've had so many like precognitive dreams and so much synchronicity in my life that I felt the wherewithal to write this down because, like I said, nobody else was talking about it. So
yeah.
I thought maybe if I was crazy that the doctor's going to have something to refer to if I made really good notes.
Well, I was told to write things down by whatever it is that tells me things. And I was just going to write down like the magical stuff I was doing to see if it had an effect because I didn't want to trust my memory. And it basically told me, no, write everything down. And I was like, okay, had I not done that, Mike's question of what was happening when you saw the UFO, I wouldn't have been able to answer.
Right.
I mean, I wouldn't have known what was going on in my life, except that I did write down what was going on in my life. I basically kept daily notes. And
wow.
I recommend people do that. It's interesting on a number of levels, not just for paranormal stuff. Because, I mean, to me, I was tracking it to see, like, when I had prophetic dreams, I wanted to have the actual dream written down from when I had it, not trying to remember what the dream was after the fact where my memory might change it.
Ah, that's a good idea.
But also what I found interesting is, like, everyone always says, well, as you get older, time goes faster. And I realized as I'm looking at all this stuff, even more recent notes, it's not that it goes faster, it's that you do less novel things.
Oh, right.
So those things don't really stick out to you. So it feels like, oh, this last novel thing happened yesterday, but it was really 2 weeks ago. And then you go, oh man, time flies. But it doesn't, you're just not doing anything novel that your brain really has any reason to, keep in its memory banks very, very much,
Right. That's interesting. Well, I think that I'm going to go with probably the things that were happening to me more when I was a teenager, because it seemed like that was the most active time. And I don't know if that means anything. But what started happening was I was having these dreams that I couldn't understand why they were happening in real life, So I started writing them down. But the very first experience that I remember that was something of note was a synchronicity. And it happened when I was in high school and I was going to Florida with my sister because my mother and my stepfather used to crew on a sailboat in Florida. And our next door neighbors moved to Florida. And so while they would crew through the Caribbean, we would stay with the neighbors who moved to Pensacola. So we went to LAX and we went to the airport and we're sitting in the lobby. And I was about 16 going on 17. Oh my God, is that really a song? I think it is.
No, it's from Sound of Music.
From Sound of Music.
No Rodgers and Hammerstein for the rest of the show. That's super cool. So.
Oh God, I just thought of that. Anyway, so we're sitting in the at the gate waiting for our flight, and sitting across from us was this family, and there was a mom and a dad and two young boys, and they looked like they're around my sisters and my age. My sister's about 3 years younger than me, and I recognized that the guy, the one who was about my age, was super good looking. I mean, he was so handsome.
As handsome as William Catt?
It wasn't William Catt. It was the guy. Do you remember the movie Blue Lagoon with Brooke Shields?
Wasn't that William Catt?
Christopher Atkins.
Christopher Atkins? I
Yes.
think I haven't been at the diet. Okay, keep going. I'm going to look this up.
So he looked like Christopher Atkins from the Blue Lagoon, and I could not stop staring at him. He was so good looking. And he was on our flight, and we were flying from LA to Dallas, and then Dallas to somewhere else, and then to Pensacola. So anyway, we flew to Dallas and we got off the plane and we went to the next gate and they went to the next gate. So they were on our connecting flight as well. And by that time, the guy had noticed me because I was on the same flight as him. And we kept staring at each other. And then we go to Florida. And at that point, my parents were flying down to Miami and we were going to fly, my sister and I were going to fly alone to Pensacola. Well, they got on our flight again. And when we got off the plane and our friends picked us up, I ran to them and we drove to their house. And it turns out that that boy was their next door neighbor.
Wow.
And so the whole time across the country, we were destined to be right next to each other. And he came over and knocked on the door. And he said, I guess I need to introduce myself. And I thought, how is this happening? It was the weirdest coincidence. And so then we ended up hanging out my entire trip.
Nice.
Isn't that great? Anyway, that was a weird story though. But like, how does that happen? How random, right? So you think when you're in high school, this is like such a random thing, right? So right around the same time, this is what's even weirder. So in high school, there was this kid, his name was Jack, and he had a crush on me, but I had a boyfriend. Long story short, I broke up with a boyfriend and then he had a girlfriend. Then he broke up with a girlfriend, then I had a boyfriend. So we always wanted to maybe like go out, but we never could. And then I got married and then I got divorced and he saw my mom at the grocery store. And she said, by the way, Suzanne's getting divorced. And so he called me and he says, guess what? We're going out. So we went out and it was horrible. We had the worst time. We're like, why did we even do this? I'm like, I have no idea. So anyway, I ended up getting remarried. I went to Greece on my honeymoon. We went to Athens before our flight to fly back to California. And while we were in Athens, I'm sitting in the Plaka having a beer. And I look across and I see this guy, and it's that guy's best friend from high school. They were in Athens. I'm sorry, they were in France running a triathlon. And then they went to Athens just for the last day. And they were both there together, but he didn't know I was there. Anyway, long story short again, turns out that they had planned their trip around our high school reunion. And so here we were in Athens, all of us having a drink together to go back to our high school reunion. And then it turned out that he ended up getting married to the girl he was there with. They ended up getting pregnant right around the same time I did. Turns out that our doctors were partners, and then we ended up having our babies on the same day.
Wow.
In the same hospital, and they went to school together. It's just so freaking weird. It's like, what is happening? So yeah. I'm like, am I creating this coincidence, or is it just it's not that I'm just paying attention, right?
Yeah, I don't know how to deal with stuff like that. Like there was a recent show I talked about this, like when I was in high school, there was this girl I really liked, but I was always bad at talking to not so much talking to girls, but I never really expected anyone to like me, you know? So I had no problem talking to girls. I had plenty of female friends. I just would never like hit on it. I've never in my life hit on somebody. So this girl who was, you know, one of the more attractive girls in the school started kind of flirting with me, and I really didn't know what to do about it. I'm like, there's no way she likes me like that, you know? And so I'm in between, or I'm either skipping classes or whatever. I'm walking down the hallway and I'm like, man, she needs to walk around the corner right now so I could just talk to her with no one around. And she walks around the corner immediately. And I just went, hi, and walked away. She got a big smile. She was like, hey, and I'm like, hi, and just kept going. And I'm like, yeah, blew that. Okay, cool. Thanks. But it's like, what is that? Did I know she was going to come around the corner and that's why the thought occurred to me? Or did somehow I retrocausally had made that happen, or what, you know? But I blew it regardless, you know?
So that's funny. You talked about retrocausality the last time. And so do we have that inkling in our head? Like, for example, seeing, you know, making for example, if you see a craft in the sky and you say, if that's really a craft, then make a wiggle or something, and then it does it. Did you say that because you knew it was going to do that?
Right. I
don't know. So... And then one time I had this, I was a hairdresser right out of high school, and I had a dream about my first boyfriend when I was in 8th grade. And his name was Benji, and he was Mormon, and he was a super nice guy. And in my dream, he had on a white t-shirt and denim overalls on. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's Benji. And I don't know if you've ever had this experience in a dream where you feel like when you're hugging somebody or something, it just feels like it's real, like it's really happening. Like you feel their energy.
Yep.
Like if you pet a cat or whatever, you just feel like it's really a solid being.
Mm-hmm.
So I had this warm feeling like I was seeing an old friend. And then I woke up and thought, wow, that was such a real dream. And so I got ready for work. And when I went to work, I was telling my first client about the dream. And as I'm telling her, I saw this guy walk by the window who was also a member of the Mormon church that I was attending at the time. And he looked at me and he put his finger up like, just 1 second, I'll be right back. So he walked by and he came back. He goes, hey, how's it going? I said, great. And he goes, I just have one question. Do you remember this guy? And he opens the door and it was Benji walking in the door wearing a white t-shirt and denim overalls. And I had just got done telling my client about this dream and her mouth was just like, what? And I said, I just have to do this. And so I give him a hug, just like the dream. It was so weird.
Which again, is it retrocausal or is it that
I don't
in
know.
the dream you picked up the information that you were going to see him and hug him later in the day?
I know. So how does that happen? How does that work?
I had a girl who I lost contact with, knew in the 90s, and she did a zine and I did a zine and I was helping her with her zine. I think she was contributing stuff to mine, but completely lost track of her at some point. And I wake up from a dream of her standing by my computer. And I was like, wow, I haven't thought about her in ages. And I got up and I went over to the computer and there's a friend request from her on Facebook. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. So,
oh my gosh, Seriah.
Wow.
How does this work?
Like
yeah, exactly. What would you say, Mike?
Oh, I've got some stories like that.
Like what?
Oh, like weird Facebook things like that.
I don't have.
That's how I met Jack.
Really?
That's how you met Jack. Yeah,
I was writing my book. I was living in Hollywood at the time. And all of a sudden I had this message from whoever to close my computer, go into the bedroom, sit on the floor, face the armoire and meditate for 5 minutes. It was very much like that. It was just like very direct instructions, right? So I went, okay. And I shut my computer, went in there and I meditated and nothing happened. And I was pissed because I was writing and I was like ruining my flow. So I went back into the living room and I opened my computer and I said, all right, let's get on Facebook. And I opened up Facebook and then ping, Jack hit me up in the messenger. So I keep thinking if I had not done that, that wouldn't have happened.
Right.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I've also, and I'm not going to say I don't get frustrated when I get behind slow drivers, especially in this area, because it's when you're driving on most of these roads, they're a single lane for your side, but there's also a lot of hills and curves. So there's not a lot of opportunity to pass people. So when you're in a 55, you come up on someone doing 40, you're like, oh, come on. It's like, at least pull over and let people by, because by the time you do get to one of those passing areas, there's probably traffic coming the other way. And it used to really frustrate me. And I'd just be like, oh, come on. And I'd be like, just itching to get around them. And now I'm like, maybe I'm not supposed to get there any sooner.
Right.
Maybe if it's not this person, it's going to be something else. I'll just follow this person.
Right. And you hear about like car accidents and stuff happening. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah,
like if they had, like maybe they would have got an accident if they hadn't have had like that car stall in front of them or what have you.
But I just feel like, sometimes the universe is setting you up for things and just kind of go with it. Back in the MySpace days.
Oh, yeah.
There was, I don't even remember how MySpace worked. I don't know if it had recommended people or something, but there was a profile that for some reason drew my attention. I didn't know if it was a guy or a girl or what. It was because it was just a picture and it was a very nondescript picture. It wasn't of a person. It was like of like a barn or something. And for some reason, I'm like, why am I drawn to this profile? And so I clicked on it and there was almost no information except a couple of lines in there were kind of like esoteric, philosophical kind of comments. And I'm like, who is this person? I'm supposed to write this person. So I wrote her. And she's like, wow, hi. And so we started talking. She wasn't actually that far away, but I never met her. But we would just talk at random. And one day she messages me at like 4 a.m. Her grandmother had died. She was having a breakdown. And I spent, I don't know how many hours talking to her until she felt better. And then we never talked again. And I was kind of like, nope, that's what that was. Also, she was like, I was told to find someone who had the same necklace I had, which was a very unusual necklace. And I'm talking to her initially and going, there's nothing here. Like, we don't listen to the same music. We don't, like, I'm not really making a connection here with her. And then she said something about her necklace. I'm like, no, really? What kind of necklace is it? And then she tells me, I'm like, okay, now there's something here. All right. Why was I supposed to find you? And, in the end, I think it was just so we could have that conversation that night when she needed someone to talk to.
Yes. Isn't that something? Wow. Amazing. And so maybe we just need to understand that maybe it's not going to be this like huge, could just be one little thing that you help somebody in that one moment for something that they needed. Or if you said something they needed to hear in that moment.
Right. And it could be something very, very quick too.
For sure. So I had this other weird thing happen. I'm just going to jump to this because it's one that sticks out in my mind.
All right, let's take a break real quick and we'll come right back and then you can tell us.
Yes. Okay.
Right on.
Quick mid-show break here and a recommendation. Contact info. Everything can be found at wheredidtheroadgo.com, which has a brand new site design thanks to John Shooter. All our social media is linked there, and you can listen to every single show all the way back to the first one. You can also help us out by becoming a patron, our Patreon, and it's only $3 a month. You get extra content all month long. As well, I've now set it up so that you can just purchase a single Patreon segment if there was a particular segment you wanted to hear, but you didn't want to join up. You can do that as well. You can also watch the documentary, Chris Ernst, made about Where Did the Road Go on the Patreon. As for a recommendation this week, I'm going to go with a movie. The movie that came out back in 2011, and it's one of my all-time favorites. It's called Sound of My Voice, and it is Britt Marling and her partner Zal, whose last name I cannot pronounce. Britt stars in it as well, and it says, 2 documentary filmmakers attempt to penetrate a cult who worships a woman who claims to be from the future. It's a great description without giving too much away. I absolutely loved it. So I haven't actually watched it in a while, but I've watched it at least twice because it's a pretty damn good movie. So that's my recommendation for this week. And now back to the conversation. You are listening to Where Did the Road Go on WVBR FM Ithaca. Check us out on the web at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. So I'm here with Suzanne Chancelor and Mike Clelland. And Suzanne, continue with what you were going to tell us before the break.
Sure. So I live in Rhode Island now, and one day I was babysitting my grandson, and he was about, I'm going to say 2 at the time, and I was cleaning, just doing a little like light dusting and stuff like that, and he was watching TV in the other room. And I just had this feeling like I really need to Swiffer under the bed. And I know all of us love doing that because it's like the one that we hate to do the least because it's so difficult to get under the bed and there's always like dust bunnies and it's just disgusting. So I went and got the Swiffer, and I had a platform bed. And so there was only like a couple of inches between the frame and the floor. Mm-hmm. So I stuck the Swiffer underneath there, and I heard this sound of like a ching-ching, like a clinging noise. And so I pulled the Swiffer out, and there was a quarter. And I was like, wow, that's interesting. What's that doing in there? And I looked at it closely. I have on my dresser a little a gold box full of coins that I've collected around the world. And I also had 3 sterling silver quarters in there. And I'm looking at this quarter. I'm like thinking, wait a minute, this looks like one of those quarters. And since it clinged something else, there must be something else underneath there. So I pulled the Swiffer down again. And when I pulled it out, the other 2 silver quarters came out. And this box on my dresser had all the coins underneath it. And then there was a necklace on top and a shell and a bracelet. And who would have picked those 3 silver quarters out and stuck them under the bed in the middle of the bed and put everything back exactly the way that I had them without me knowing it?
Yeah.
And why would they pick those quarters? And they were like U.S. quarters. They weren't like, something from Greece or, pounds from England or whatever. So I just thought that was the weirdest thing. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that one's bizarre. I mean, obviously they assumingly apported there because, who would put them there?
Yes.
But why?
I couldn't even reach under the bed to get them with my hand if I wanted to.
I mean, that's like we had up in the Potter's Field for Willard psychiatric center where we used to hang out, it was a cliff that overlooked the lake, Seneca Lake, and it's a beautiful spot. And they had demolished the building that stored all the tombstones and everything. And the tombstones were actually just little metal plates with numbers on them. And one of the plates was sticking out of when they demolished the building, they used it to kind of like gravel some of the road that went through the main part of, the graveyard. And so we're walking up there. We're like, oh my God, they demolished all this stuff. And we found a gravestone sticking out of the road. And I'm like, well, I'm taking that. That's ours, and it was broken and stuff. And I'm like, cool. So we had this bench and I stuck it under the bench. And just because no one even knew the bench was there, it was hidden so well. And unless you knew to reach under there for the gravestone, you wouldn't have been able to find it.
Wow.
And one day I went up there and we're sitting there and I'm like, oh, and I reach under for the gravestone and it's gone. And I'm like, what the hell? What? This doesn't make any sense. And I'm looking around like, did it slide into something? Did it get, did an animal push it or something? And nope. And so I finally give up. I'm like, okay, it's just gone. I guess someone found it and took it. And so then we're leaving. And as we're leaving, we're looking to the right, which is where the cliff is. And it's sitting under a bush with everything cleared out and 3 sticks on each side of it.
Oh my God.
The thing is, I couldn't get to it.
Wow.
And I'm like, we're looking at this and I'm like, am I missing something? Is there another? Because one side was the cliff drop off. And the other side was thick foliage, and the rest of the third of it that was facing the field was a thick bush. I could just barely see it through the thick bush, but it had been literally the ground had been cleared. And like I said, there's 3 sticks. It was arranged very carefully. And I'm like, what? And my friend with me is losing his mind because he's like, there's no way it could be there. How is it there? And I literally had to break branches on the bush to get to it.
What?
And I picked it back up and I went, this one's mine. I'm keeping this one. And I went back and put it under the bench again.
Wow.
And he's going, crazy. And he's just sitting there going, can we leave? Can we leave? Can we leave?
I mean, what is that all about?
Right. Like, what was the point of that? Because it wasn't it's not like it was a used gravestone. So, you can't really say, well, the spirit whose gravestone it was moved it, but it wasn't in a threatening sort of pose. Right. It didn't just disappear, but it was clearly meant for us to find it there. And this also, I should state, is pre-Blair Witch. So,
wow.
So it was not, because it sounds like something the Blair Witch Project would have come up with. Because I think they did that at one point. Didn't they have like sticks laying on side of something?
Yeah.
Well, that's something that shows up in ghost sightings and Bigfoot sightings. It's just a little stick.
Yeah.
Stick. Like Kachina dolls. That's not the right way to say it, but just little
stick figures. Yeah.
Stick figures. Yeah.
If I had,
sticks. Yeah.
This was probably like 1992, so I didn't have a camera on me. If it happened today, the first thing I'd be doing is going, take a picture. Okay, now let's see if I can get to it.
Yeah, really. I mean, now everyone we all go everywhere with our cameras.
Right.
With our cell phones. And it's really great that we do, I think, because who knows when you're going to see something, just like taking a random picture and something will be in the corner that you wouldn't even know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
And you don't have to wait for them to get developed either.
That's true. Speaking of, so this is a really weird one. Mike knows about this because I've talked about it incessantly. So one day I was sitting in the living room and the window was open and my neighbor across the street was talking to his grandson in his backyard and I could hear them because they were just pretty loud. And the grandson's like, yeah, I listened to this podcast and blah, blah, blah. And the grandfather's like, oh, I totally believe in UFOs. And I got so excited because I feel like nobody really knows anything about me in my neighborhood. And I felt like this was like an opportunity to maybe, I don't know, connect with these people who are into this subject, because everybody pretty much keeps to themselves. So I was trying to hear like what they were talking about. And I'm thinking, oh, maybe I should tell them that I have a podcast and blah, blah, blah. And I thought, you know what I'm going to do? The next time they walk their dog, I'm going to put my UFO magazine hat on when I take my dog for a walk.
Nice.
As an icebreaker, right? So, funny thing, they all of a sudden were taking their dog for a walk. So I'm like, oh my gosh. So I grabbed my phone, I grabbed my dog, put on my hat, and I went the opposite direction. So I would like run into them, right?
Right.
Around the block. So as I'm coming around the corner, wearing my hat, I look at them and they're like, hey, and they just keep walking. And I'm like, Wah wah. Oh well. So I just thought I'll just keep walking. So I just was walking along, and then my dog decides to go to the bathroom. And as she's sitting there, I happen to look up in the sky and I see a freaking UFO. And I'm like, what am I seeing? Wait a minute, what? I saw a silver, it looked like what a Tic Tac would be, like that kind of shape, but it was kind of oscillating around itself, and it was moving along really slowly. And so I had my phone and I started taking a videotape of it, or videotape. I started recording it. My God, I just totally dated myself. And I started recording it, and I started narrating that it was going to come on the other side of the tree, and then it did. And then I sat there staring at it, and it was completely motionless for the longest time. And I was so excited that I had my hat on. I channeled the UFO, and it showed up.
And what did it look like on the video?
I still have it. And it's really great because I actually took about 3 or 4 different videos. And in one of the videos, if you slow it down, you can actually see other like little sprites coming in and out of the frame.
Oh.
Yeah. So
is this online anywhere?
It sure is online.
It is. And I also have another one that is not online that I shared with a couple people, and they clearly could see these other things that are happening around this one dot in the middle. So I mean, it's so hard to tell with phones anymore.
It is. It is. And where is the one online?
It's on my blog.
Which is
abducteeawareness.blogspot.com.
Okay.
And it says UFO sighting. I think it was May 15th or something like that. So yeah, definitely you can see it there.
Was it this year?
Oh no.
Oh, okay.
It was many years ago, right, Mike?
It wasn't that many years ago, but it was maybe 3 or 4 years ago. Yeah.
I think it was longer than that.
Did it look in person like it showed up on the video?
The
video is pretty impressive, yeah.
Yeah, it actually, because I was able to zoom in on it, and you could see it clearly. I don't know if you have it pulled up right now, but I mean, if you look at it later, yeah, it's pretty clear actually. But like
what I'm saying though is it looked exactly the same on the video as to your eyes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times they don't, and that's what I find interesting. Because I feel like our brains are picking up more data than so it does. Our brain doesn't know what to do with that extra data, so it makes the sound extra loud or the light extra bright. And then we see if we recorded it, we're like, well, why isn't it coming across the same way? And I think it's because part of that is your brain trying to find a way to interpret this extra data for you. Right.
I see what you're saying. Yeah. I was really impressed with the fact that I was able to capture it, because it was so, when you see sky and that what you're trying to focus on is so small, the camera was really having a difficult time focusing on what it was I was trying to see. So I was able to actually lock in on it for probably about 3 or 4 seconds before it vanished behind a tree. So yeah, that was pretty. I was so excited. I was so excited to have that experience. Yep.
On May 18th, 2019, I had an amazing experience while walking my dog.
That was it. You're right. It was 2017.
2019.
Oh, 19. I'm sorry. Yeah, so it wasn't that long ago.
Yeah, I said 4 or 5 years ago. That's right. Yeah.
You're right.
Look at me.
Look at you. Wow. You know more than I do. So, yeah, that was the last actual craft that I'd seen. But I've had, talking about retrocausality, like you were saying, like thinking about that girl who, showed up.
Right.
So I was upstairs and I was dusting the upstairs bookshelf, and I saw this book that I'd never really noticed before. So I pulled it out of the books and I was just kind of looking at it, and it was called The 5 People You Meet in Heaven by Mitch Albom. And so I was just kind of looking at it, and there was nothing really interesting about it, but I just put it back on the shelf and went about my day. And then that night we were eating dinner, and then we were watching, I think it was either like Jeopardy or The Chase or something. And one of the questions was, how many people did Mitch Albom say you would see in heaven? That was one of the questions. I am dead serious. Like, how many books are there in the world ever written? And that was the question. So was that retrocausality or what?
Yeah, it's hard to tell where to define what one is and what, because I mean, one thing could be retrocausality and something else that looks just like it may not be.
And what determines that?
I don't know. That's the biggest question. I mean, it comes down to what is reality.
Right. So is it, so a lot of times I think about, are we having like, It's not like remote viewing, but because obviously it's not happening in real time. I mean, I had one experience like that, but all these did not happen in real time. But I did have this one experience once where I had this dream where I was dancing with one of my hairdressing clients, this man.
William Cat? Oh, he's got to come into the scene here somehow.
Oh, not William Cat. No, I had a client
greatest
named
American hero.
Yes, that's what it was. Who? Let's talk about this. The guy, what was his first name? The guy who sang that song?
Yeah.
Something, Joey Scarborough. His wife was a manicurist in my hair salon.
Oh, wow. Okay, well, there's the connection.
There you go. So I had a client and I had a dream that I was dancing with him, but it was like in the 1600s in England, and it was in this big ballroom, and I was wearing this big dress. I had this huge hairdo, and I'm dancing around with him, and then my grandmother comes up, taps me on the shoulder, and pushes him away, and she looks at him, and she says, "You can't dance with her. You're married." And he said, "Oh, excuse me," and he like bowed to her, and he walked away. And when I woke up, I thought, wow, that was such a weird dream. And I got in my car, and as I'm driving to work, I looked in my rearview mirror. He was driving the car right behind me. I'm like, what? So I put on my blinker to get off the freeway, and he puts his blinker on and gets off the freeway. And I make a right-hand turn. He makes a right-hand turn. I get in the left lane. He gets in the left lane. I make a left. He makes a left. I'm thinking, what is happening? I pull in the parking lot of my hair salon and I run into the front door, shut the door. I go up to the front books where my books are for the day, my appointment.
Mm-hmm.
My first appointment had canceled overnight and he had taken her place.
So, I mean, that again, are you picking up that happened from an information field somewhere? Yes.
So where's the information field and why do we tap into it? Is it like a different...
And how do we do a better job of tapping into it?
Yes, exactly. But I mean, these things have just been happening to me forever.
Yeah. Oh, same here.
And me too.
You know, and it's...
Can I tell one?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Okay. So this is, Suzanne, I know you know this one, and I put it on a blog post, but I really never tell it. It's kind of so subtle that it's like, it doesn't make for, I mean, anyway, I was in England. This is going back in a decade ago, 2014. And I was speaking at a conference and they flew me over there. So I ended up spending like an extra 10 days. I just wanted to tour around and I was just on my own. And there was a crop circle conference. So, well, I'll go to this crop circle conference. And it was this little small town of Marlborough, and Marlborough College, which is this like, oh my God, it's so freaking like English. And, and I was stayed at this little bed and breakfast and I didn't want to drive because it's the wrong side of the road. So I got a bicycle and then there was I looked, it was like a train track, like a rails to trails thing. It was like this trail through the woods that went from the bed and breakfast to the center of town. It's like, this is the coolest thing ever. So I rented this bike and I had this really cool route. And so, but I spent the day at the conference and then rode the bike home. And so I was at the bed and breakfast after dinner was kind of ended. And I kind of showed up late and they were like, that's kind of not cool. I found out afterwards, like, you're not supposed to do that at a bed and breakfast. You're supposed to be on time. And so they were like, oh, okay. So I just said, okay, I'll have a little bit. So I had a Guinness stout, and then I had some little entree or something. And so I was the only one there. And there's one waitress, and she's looking at me. She's actually very attractive, and it was like this, like if you had to cast someone in a movie, you couldn't pick someone more perfect. So in her very proper English accent, she looked at me and said, "Are you one of those crappies?" And this is right in the heart of crop circle country. And I'm like, well, I not really, but I guess I am because I just went to a crop circle conference today. He's like, well, what do you do? I mean, what do you mean? Sort of. What does that mean? And so I said, well, I'm doing this research on owls. And she said, oh, just last night I came home from work. And the way the driveway is, it's on a curve, and so I was turning, and there are 4 posts along the driveway as you pull into the farmhouse where I'm living, my home, and 1, 2, 3, 4 posts, and on each post was an owl. So there were 4 owls on 4 posts, and they lit up beautifully as I turned in, and my headlights lit up 1, 2, 3, 4. And I was sitting there, and I kind of went, oh, that was me. And she looked at me like, what do you think, you manifested these owls for me? I'm like, well, so she kind of said, we talked for a while, and there was the beer, and we talked for a long time, and it was kind of so I said, oh, here's the research I'm doing, here's the stuff that's happening, and this is the kind of thing I'm doing, and here's the kind of synchronicities I'm happening. And she was genuinely kind of doubtful at the same time, really interesting. So at this end of this long conversation, she said, perhaps you did manifest those owls.
That was perfect.
Yeah, and again, what is that? Like, how do we?
Well, what is that? Yeah, I
that?
think it's just meant to have that moment of like, oh, geez, like I think it's meant to have that so you can experience that whether it's the frantic emotions that I used to have around synchronicities or the more awestruck moments I feel like I'm capable of having now by them. So yeah, that was a genuinely sort of, I guess I was in England, so it was a very polite culture. So I had a very polite synchronicity involving owls there.
I was at my next door, and I've told this story a number of times, but I was at my next door neighbor's setting up the internet on her TV, and her landlord was there. And I don't know, I've never met this woman before in my life. She lives a couple houses down. She was renting from the people who lived in the main house, and who also I know, but I don't really interact with a lot. So they don't know that I do a paranormal show or any of this stuff. And this woman who I've never met, who's barely talked to me, just suddenly goes, see UFOs over the lake sometimes.
Mm.
And the landlord just kind of looks at her and she's like, what? And I'm like, yeah, that happens. And she's like, what do you mean that happens? And I'm like, Cayuga Lake's known for UFO sightings. And the woman's going, oh, good. Okay, so I'm not crazy. I'm like, nope, I've seen them. And the landlord's like, wait, what do you mean, Cayuga? And she's like Googling it. And she goes, look at that. Cayuga Lake is known for UFO sightings. But like, awesome. It was just out of nowhere.
Yeah. I just love, how people, I don't know, maybe they just know to ask or to say something.
Yeah. She picked something up. I don't know.
Yeah. I think I've given up trying to understand the mechanism of the synchronicity. How does it work? Like I've heard a lot of people theorize on like, oh, you generate it yourself, or
right.
And what I'm more interested in is the emotional power of the synchronicity. Here, can I tell one more?
Yeah, sure.
This is so. This would have been last summer, and I was starting to work on the follow-up book for The Unseen. All I've done so far is taken a lot of notes, and I haven't really written anything. But I want like a good. So anyway, there's a park I go to, and I listen to podcasts. And this park is really wonderful. This is in the Olympic Peninsula, so it's got the big trees and all the moss and the ferns, but there's this tight little scribbly route of paths there, so you can just walk, and it's really pretty. And the paths are just so you can get kind of lost, and you always end up kind of leading yourself back. So it's this really fun place to hike for a couple hours. It's not too far from here, so I go there all the time, and I'm walking and I'm listening to a podcast, and this podcast is called the Modern Fairy Sightings Network, and it's hosted by this woman named Jo Hickey-Hall, and she's doing fairy research, and it sounds just like Bigfoot research. It sounds just like synchronicity research. It sounds just like UFO research. The people who are seeing fairies, it's essentially the same story. So she's in England, and she's talking to people who have seen fairies or have had, let's say, powerful mystical experiences within that framework. And so she's interviewing a woman named Amanda Radcliffe. And Amanda Radcliffe had a shining lady or a lady in white experience. And she says, oh, and then they never quite get to the story. And it's like, oh, this story's going to come up. I can tell this story's going to happen. But I'm waiting for her to tell that story. And I said, I had an owl experience that came to me in a letter, and I corresponded with this woman. And she had a lady in white experience. And then I also know Chris Bledsoe, and he had the mother of all lady in white experiences. Is in his book, UFO of God. He's told it many times, happened in his yard. I've been to his house, Chris's house in North Carolina, stood in his yard. He said, this is where it happened. It happened right here. This is where the lady in white appeared. And it comes across this not even biblical, but like an ancient archetype that emerged in his yard, and like basically gave him a message to
didn't it say it was Hathor?
No, he never said it. Never gave a name.
Okay.
It doesn't show up in. It never used the name in Chris's experience. He always calls it the shining lady or the lady in white.
Okay, because when I had Marty on last week, we actually talked about this, and Marty said basically the entity seemed to be Hathor.
Hathor is a like a Babylonian god or
Egyptian
god. Okay, yeah, and
goddess.
Then, Hathor, of course, yeah. So it's so he had a painting done by Doug Auld, did a painting of to match Chris's experience, and he says it captures a woman very closely. And so I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, I gotta somehow get a hold of this woman and tell her Chris's story, because I think this is gonna. So I'm thinking, I'm listening to this show on fairies and listening to these two English women talk about their experiences, and then as I'm walking on this trail, she says, and then I met with Diana Pasulka. And as soon as she said that, I knew that she knew of Chris's Lady in White story, because Diana Pasulka was working with Chris Bledsoe around the time that he had his Lady in White sighting.
Right.
And Diana Pasulka is a professor of religious studies in North Carolina and wrote the book American Cosmic. She's since come up. I think it was before the book Encounters came out, but she has two loosely based UFO books. So I'm walking on this trail, and there's one part where there's kind of a dirt road, and it's a long and straight dirt road. So I step off the trail. I step onto the long, straight dirt road. It's very narrow. It's very wooded. It's very pretty. And so and as I'm stepping off, she says, and then I met Diana Pasulka, and I had that. She knows the Chris Bledsoe Lady in White story. And as I turn the corner, as these things collide, like boom, boom, she knows. I turn the corner, I look on the trail, there is a fairy. Now let me explain the fairy. The fairy was a woman dressed in a fairy costume, walking down that road, like a real woman. And it's not like she didn't go to the like the wardrobe department, from the Lord of the Rings. This was like a dollar store fairy costume of it was like the ugliest, crinkliest, thin kind of cellophane plastic, and it had cloyingly cutesy wootsy pink but it had like fairy wings that were made out of like crinkly, cheap, like cellophane stuff, and it was like, so she had fairy wings, and she had like the tight little fairy tights on, and like a little fairy gown kind of thing that's made out of all this cheap plastic. And she looked at me, and wow, she gave me this look. I lived in New York City, and I know what that look is like. Don't you dare talk to me. It's like I was going to say, like, hey, got to tell you, like, a whopper of a synchronicity just happened. She gave me this look like, I guess I'm not telling her anything. So I passed her by, and she kind of was like, looked at me a little bit and then looked away, and she had that kind of stern look. But she looked like, it was really funny. She looked like this friend of mine from like high school, which was a long time ago. And this woman, my friend from high school, I'll use her name, Lea Clivette. She was very pretty, and she had like good high. She would be a good fairy. She had high cheekbones, and she had this little cat, just what do you call it, with like the corners of the eyes are upturned a little bit. Just had that kind of cat eye kind of thing, sort of like if you wanted to cast someone in a movie as a fairy, you could cast this woman that I passed on the trail, like just her eyes and her hair, and she had blonde hair. But she looked like this. She kind of looked like Lea Clivette, who kind of looked like a fairy. And then I walked a little further, and I looked behind me, and she was standing totally still, and she was looking off into the woods. And then I walked a little farther and looked back behind me, and she was gone. I don't think there's any paranormal thing. There's other trails and stuff she could have easily stepped off onto. But it took me a little while to think about this. The woman that sent me, that I corresponded with, she was lying in her bed. This is the story that I thought about, where it's like, I have a Lady in White experience in my files. I get all these owl stories. And so she said I was lying in bed, and she lives in a rural, I'm not going to say where she lives, I don't want to give too much away, but she lives in a rural area, and she's kind of a hot climate, and there was a metal roof on her home. And she said, I woke up in the middle of the night, and there was something walking around the middle of the roof, and I knew it was owls. So I knew there were owls on the roof. And then I was had an out-of-body experience. I'm vaulted out of my bed. I'm thrown into outer space, and I'm standing in outer space looking down at the earth, and next to me, floating in outer space, is the Lady in White. And she's wearing a white gown, and she's radiating glowing white energy. And then she says, she points to the earth, and she looked at the earth, and there's like this kind of aurora around the earth. And I'm paraphrasing from memory here. I'm getting this close, I think. And the Lady in White said, you're trapped here. We have trapped you, and you can't leave. Like, basically, we have put an energetic outline, or something energetic around the earth that won't allow humanity to leave Earth. And then she's back in her bed. And then I sent this woman who sent me the owl story with the Lady in White. I sent her the picture that Doug Auld had painted. Doug Auld is a sort of friend in this little circle of people who have had these kind of experiences. And it was the picture that he painted for Chris Bledsoe of his Lady in White sighting, which happened in his backyard, which plays out like a biblical parable or something. It's really powerful. And then I showed it to this woman, and she got back to me right away, and she said, "Oh my God, I almost like fell out of my chair. This is exactly what this woman looked like." And the woman's name was Lea. So Lea, that's not a very common name. So Lea, I was like, that was my very first thought. This lady looks like Lea Clivette. And then this woman that had the Shining Lady story was named Lea. Now, I was interviewed on the Modern Fairy Sightings Network probably 2 years ago, and I had a great interview. The woman and I had a personal conversation beforehand, so I knew what we were going to be talking about. The woman hosted Jo Hickey-Hall, which is a great name. So Jo, she had an owl experience, really powerful owl experience, and she had also seen a fairy, and they're kind of tied together, the stories. So, and then I told Jo that I saw a fairy, obviously it's a woman in a funny fairy costume, as I was listening to her podcast, as she was talking to Amanda Rathcliffe. So I sent her a note. She immediately texts Amanda Rathcliffe. Amanda Rathcliffe was moving to Glastonbury. So she had just moved to Glastonbury, which is the most magical part of England. It's like the Sedona of England, or it's like, and so she's unpacking, and the text comes in as she's opening. She's packed everything up. She's unpacking to move into this new house. She gets the text from Jo Hickey-Hall that Mike Clelland, the owl guy, just contacted me and said he saw a fairy as she was unwrapping a framed picture of an owl, and she was about to put it on the wall.
Of course.
So then I had so then it was like, oh, I guess I got to talk to this woman, Amanda. So I had this long set of phone calls or whatever phone we talked over so I'm here I'm like on the other side of the 9 time zones away or whatever it is here in Seattle, and she's in England. We have a bunch of conversations, and she basically, I was kind of stuck in the storyline, and she's doing research into, I don't want to give too much away, but it basically into mythologies, ancient mythologies. And I wanted to put certain ancient mythologies into the follow-up story to the unseen. It was like the one perfect person on earth to talk with. And so basically she gave me everything I needed, it felt like, for book 2.
Nice.
So just back engineer that one. Like what happened? How did this?
Well, actually, we're out of time. So.
That's typical of me to talk.
But let's continue this in a Patreon if you two are willing.
Sure.
And tell people where they can find you, Mike.
You can Google UFO owl, and I come right up. And if you want to type more things in, more than 6 characters, you can type in MikeClelland.com, and then that's a kind of a hub site, and it'll take you to my blog and to my books and such. And let me push the book. I just published a novel, and that's been at the top of my list of what I want to try to promote lately. So it's been very well received.
Yeah, so we talked about it a few weeks ago.
We talked about it, yes. The last time I was here,
And Suzanne, where can people find you?
Yes, so I have a blog and a podcast, which are both kind of inactive right now, but I have a lot of archives. So I have random alien brain droppings at podbean.com, and then I have abducteeawareness.blogspot.com. I'm also on Facebook, Insta, and all the normal places.
All right. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Take care, Seriah.
All right. I'd like to take a moment here to thank all of my Patreons for their support. Without you, this show would not be possible. And I want to give a shout out to those of you pledging $10 or more. Greg Ross, John Blackburn, Madeline J., Matt in Delaware, Allison Cook, Super Inframan, 36 Dingo, Tim, Andrew Nichols, Matthew Sproul, Martha, Midnight Review Presents, Christine, a blue 2nd Gen MR2 drifting around a Japanese mountain, Patricia Giaquinta, American Rambler, Andrew Maines, Ann Witowski, Barbara Fisher, Beverly Williamson, Illuminati, Bright Rectangle, Charles Davis, Charles in Florida, Land of the Crazy and Communicable, Corey Nelson, Craig Parmenter, Diane B., MTK, Eric Citron, Eric Todd, History and Coffee, J. Otto Bullitt, Jack Huntington, James Lindsay, Jamin Sophie, John Mattingly, John Bracken, Carla Mahoney, Kevin Schreck, Cool Kitty, Kristen L., Laser Printer Jam, Lauren McLean, Linda, Linz Jackson K., MJ Armstrong, Mark Brady, Sasha McHale, No One, Oli Andre Olar, Paul Jeffries, Perry Peters, Philosopher of Mirrors, Riker and Stark, Ron Dupre, Sam Sharon, Sarah Horgan, Stacy Sherwood, Stevie Norman, Strange Stories with the Seeker and Skeptic Podcast, Tactical Therapist, Taylor Bell, The Esoteric Book Club Podcast, Thunderboy, Tyler Glimstead, Varosh K, Victoria, Vincent Trewell, Will Gebhard, Will Powell, Ren Collier, Annabelle Smith, Caroline Walker, TDT Skunkworks, Matthew Brown, Colin Karras, and Craig Sagastumi. Thank you all so very much for the support. Well, if you enjoyed that conversation, there's a lengthy Patreon segment that we continue talking about this stuff in, and you can find that at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Just like everything else, there's a link to Patreon. You click it. You pay $3 a month. You get extra content almost every show, usually every show, sometimes more than every show. You get the shows a week early. You get them commercial free, and you get access to other stuff as well. You can, if you want now, just pick a Patreon segment or a show that you want to hear early and just pay for that. But all said and done, you're better off just becoming a patron and becoming a monthly supporter. Helps us out greatly. So does rating and supporting the show, sharing it, all that type of stuff. For anyone who's interested in heavy music, I do a show called The Last Exit for the Lost, and that can be found at thelastexit.org. There's an archive of shows that go all the way back. It's not every show, but I have shows as old as 1996 on there. I think everything from this year is up, and there's all kinds of crazy stuff on there if you want to go digging. I'll see you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.